Greetings, this is Aya Dhammadina. I'm a Buddhist nun and one of Candana Bhikkhu students. So you're about to watch a Dhamma talk, a rarity these days. So just wanted to make a quick note that as a monk, Bhante survives on donations from viewers like you. He's a homeless monk. He doesn't have the support of a Buddhist community. So if you are benefiting from these Dhamma talks that are freely available, please consider donating to support Bhante's work and make sure he's able to have food and shelter and dwelling so that he can continue freely sharing Dhamma with all of us. Thank you.
Humanity has perfected the art of deception, I think, especially during the last 100 years or so. And people probably have never been in history, documented history. People have never been this confused. This, despite the fact that there's so much information. It's supposed to be the opposite. During the Dark Ages in Europe, while the Dark Ages were going on in Europe, it wasn't Dark Ages in the Middle East, for example, or in Asia. There were so many, developments taking place in the field of sciences, mathematics, medicine, philosophy, astronomy. So it wasn't Dark Ages for them. However, let's just look at it in a collective manner as to the world's state of human beings. Individuals who didn't have access, which was the larger part of society. Of course, Europe, the percentage of people was a lot greater. Only a select number of individuals in the whole country had access to information. Were they the part of the clergy or the royal families here and there, who had access to go and study, let's say, in places like Cordova in Spain or other places that had some information, but even that, it was limited. But when you look at the whole planet at that time, in that era, let's say, after the 3rd or 4th century, Common Era, up until the Renaissance, people, nevertheless, including the Renaissance and the Baroque period and Classical period, despite the fact that people didn't have the information we have, they were making much better choices. They were making such incredible feats happen. Buildings came up. I don't believe people are able to, today, with our technological so-called advancements, we cannot build a Chartres cathedral in France, let's say, Cathédrale de Chartres, or the different buildings. Even one as recent as a few months ago, I was in Budapest, Hungary, and I was walking by their parliament building. It's out of this world when you think of it. When you try to measure it with today's building standards, and aside from the fact that it was simply beautiful, aside and put that aside, just looking at it architecturally. I don't know if today's architects would be able to build something like that. If we have even the manpower, if we have even the science to build it, interestingly enough. We talk about going to Mars or to the whatever planet. We can't even go to the moon. So we have so much information, but we're not able to accomplish. So that's the evidence for me that something is wrong with us now, centuries after these things were built. We have been, as a population, fed deceptions. And this is the primary source of it, comes from the educational fields, from the academia, from the books that are designed to dumb us down. The language. I remember over decades when I was in the educational system, both as a student and also as an academician, I was noticing how the language was changing. The standards were, well, getting lowered. In the capacity of a teacher, I was being forced to take the road by those above, to take the road of creating a lot of gray space, meaning not to promote excellence in individuals who had an excellent attitude, excellent acumen, excellent drive. They had the drive to know, understand, to build, to probe their mind, to probe what is possible and what is impossible, and why is it impossible. Now that is why and how human beings have excelled, especially in those time periods that I just mentioned, and the things that we built. And the buildings that we have today, just to pick on the buildings, are quite far in between in their number compared to what you would have found in the 18th century. Of course, they always blame it on wars, this and that, but even 60, 70 years ago, when Europe rebuilt itself after World War II, still the buildings that many of these older cities built are still amazing. They're unmatched by today's technology. But this is not about architecture. This is about, what I want to address is this whole business of evidence-based models, evidence-based. Where did this term come from? Academicians. Peer-reviewed, that's another thing. Now, it's even journalists with double-digit IQ, they talk about peer-reviewed. Is this evidence-based? This was in the field of, let's say, psychotherapy, when you're doing research and when you're looking at different studies and things like that, where you had all of a sudden a slew of new models, therapeutic models showing up. One, in my opinion, more useless than the other coming up, compared to the really valuable legacy that the initial psychotherapeutic schools had discovered and formulated. For example, Carl Whitaker, the father of experiential symbolic, systemic therapy. For me, he was an inspiration to look at, because fortunately we do have a few snippets of videos of him and also his books of how he worked with people. He never cared about evidence-based this, that, nonsense, and even the assessments. He would, yes, he was obviously trained medical doctor as well, a caring, loving human being, a true therapist. But today's therapy, it's a joke compared to, and he just happens to be one of a golden era, I would say, where people really were invested. Minuchin was another. This evidence-based, is this based on evidence? Okay. Remember what I was saying about manipulation, deception. We have perfected it. You see this all the time. A person might get shot in front of your eyes, in front of the cameras. You're not going to get a better evidence than that. Because oftentimes they ask you if, they ask people, well, what's your evidence? Well, here's my evidence. Here's a report. Okay, here's eyewitnesses' accounts. Here's, etc., etc. But a video from an actual, somewhat credible source, even if you show that to 100 million people, it's not enough. Today, it's no longer enough. Why? It is not the evidence that matters. It is who is interpreting the evidence, who is presenting the evidence, who is colorizing, doctoring the information, as they say, photoshopping what is really there, the raw data. What is being done to that? Excuse me. So all this talk about evidence, is it evidence-based, is it peer-reviewed? Well, first of all, peer review, who is my peer? What is? It was, science became an authority in its truest sense. Because most of this, what they call science, it has to be agreeing with the narrative. Okay? Especially with the universities and the fundings that they get. So if you happen to be a scientist who does not agree, whose findings do not agree with the larger narrative, it's out. Nature will not publish it. Nature, the magazine, famous scientific journals, will not publish it. In fact, you might even lose your tenureship. You will lose your grants if you don't change your interpretations, your data that does not agree with your peers, who happen to be peers for a reason. Peer means what? You're basically on the same level. It's not even a gradient. It's like the majority. What's the consensus? Consensus. There is no science, there is no innovation coming out of a consensus. You know that? Science or scientific endeavor, in fact, it's a rebellious endeavor. It is a fearless endeavor. It is an adventurous endeavor. And you will not find peers there, I guarantee it. Because peers basically means a lot of people who are mediocre. They have membership in this place and that place, and they have acceptance from a larger group of people equally mediocre. Well, science is not the result of mediocrity, the way I understand it anyhow. it pierces through the film, the layer of mediocrity, of the mundane, of what everyone's talking about. Science doesn't care about what is everyone talking about. It cares about what is really going on. And the same thing with truth. So someone who's pursuing the truth will look at the evidence and will not look over his shoulder or her shoulder to see what are my peers saying. If you turn around to look at what your peers are reviewing and saying, guess what? You are not looking at what is happening under your nose. The reality, the truth that is taking place under your nose. That's why this whole peer review business, this so-called evidence-based, which by the way is not, it's the opposite of that. It's 180 degrees opposite of that. But it gives you the deception. Again, we come back to how they've manipulated language. We have so much technology, I was saying. We have so much information, but we are the dumbest we've ever been as human beings. The dumbest. I was looking at my generation of people who had attended school, let's say whether it was at 12 or 15 or 18 or 20 something. And then I would always look and contrast with the other generation that I would go through, seeing as a professor, as a teacher, etc., etc. And I would see a major discrepancy. Like if you're saying that you've graduated high school, and I'm talking to you about this, the way we used to talk with my friends and my classmates on these matters, whether it's geography, whether it's literature, whether it's philosophy, whether it's science, whether it's astronomy, the world situation, whatever, you need to have a certain level of understanding, comprehension, way of analysis, critical thinking. I was stunned to see that people were just not there. Of course, I was noticing this happen in America, mostly. But then I started traveling, and I started seeing that this was happening more and more in Western countries, especially English-speaking countries. They are leading the way in dumbing down society, the academic system. But in such a short time, there's been like this exponential drop. Usually exponential means going up, but in this case it's a drop in intelligence, in comprehension, in looking beyond the boundary that's drawn in front of you, looking beyond the box that you're looking at, seeing with the peripheral vision. So please don't be fooled by these terms, fancy terms of evidence-based model, evidence-based, because most of these so-called studies that are done, they're completely manipulated. And I would, even I would look at research papers and studies, and after you've gone through that tedious information and all the statistical numbers and all that you see and this and that, and then I would always be interested about, to see what their conclusions were. Oftentimes they're nullifying the whole premise which the title of this paper is presuming to be talking about. They're supposed to talk to you about if there's any, conflict of interest at the very basic level, And some of them, if they do talk about it, they will tell you, and they're supposed to be 100% transparent, but only few are, and if they are, you get shocked because you see how they're through and through biased. The data that they collected is flawed. They themselves are admitting it, but they use a certain language that most people even don't get to that section of the paper. But what remember the dumbed down society? They are completely satisfied with the title of the paper. Can you wrap your mind around that? People don't even read the articles that they say, well, in this scientific journal, in this scientific article, in this, they say this. That's it, done. No argument there. And journalists, people, this and that, they start talking about it, but nobody has actually read the paper. I used to, to my amazement, to my surprise and shock, I noticed this when I was, even as I was a professor, I went back to school to pursue another degree on the side. So I was one of the oldest people in the classroom, and I would be sitting along individuals in their 20s and 30s, younger than I, and I would see, in some cases the professors were younger than myself, but that's not the point. What I would notice is, you have the reading list, the assignments, and on this day, you have to read this many articles for this class. So I would go and prepare, I would read the articles. At the very least, I had to read the articles. So I would show up expecting us in the auditorium, in the classroom, to have a discussion, to have a Q&A, the professor's job is and was, I presumed, to ask the students as to what they thought about the articles and the conclusions reached. Over 90% of my classmates, if not 99%, had not read the articles. I was surprised. I was shocked. I felt like, what's going on? And then I was raising questions, and many people were trying to defend a position, and when I would ask, or even before class, they would tell me they hadn't read the article. But they give themselves the authority to be debating on the content of the article, which they never read. And this floored me, as they say, made like my jaw dropped at the audacity of ignorance in academia. Well, that was some years ago. Today, it's so pervasively, it's spread out. You see this everywhere. The news. The journalist is seeing a building blow up with hundreds of people in it die in it. He's not the only one. You have over at least 1 or 2 billion people who saw it. And the journalist is sitting there interviewing someone and putting the very moral issue of it. Here are human beings who just lost their lives in a hospital, let's say, or a building, or anywhere. These are individuals who lost their lives because of this action. There cannot be any justification for such a thing. But they're completely looking aside from this very blatant evidence that's smacking them in the face and pretending that it is not as serious as people are making it to be. Now, I will tell you what would make it become that way, make it become really serious. If someone they knew was in that building, or someone they loved was in that building. So this brings us back as to who it is who is interpreting the evidence. Evidence means nothing, okay? Evidence means nothing on its own. Science has proven that. Heisenberg's theory of the uncertainty, where you can look at the way you look, this is in the realm of quantum science, quantum mechanics, quantum theory, how your position, holding, your view on things definitely impacts the outcome of what it is that you're looking at, their behavior. The thing that you're looking, basically the electron or the subatomic particles that you're looking at, the behavior will change, not from person to person, but from you looking at it now with this position, with this attitude, with this intention, the way you want to see it, versus you looking at it later with a different attitude. It's interesting how Lord Buddha talked about the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path, and the very first of these steps, the 8 steps, the first one is, the gateway is right view. So science is proving the importance of view. So today, human beings, our humanity, the culture of humans, is lost in a jungle of data that it doesn't know what to do with. It's like putting a chef, or not even a chef, somebody who wants to cook in a place, in a kitchen, which has such an incredible, vast resources for food items, grains of all kinds, rice from different parts of the world, vegetables of all kinds, fruits of all kinds, different incredible seasonings, spices, all available, placed there in all kinds of pots and pans. For this person to make something with all that, different types of oils, etc., everything that is basically the dream of a culinary, chef. But this person goes in there and opens up a can of sardines and eats them, and says, this is it, this is what this place provides, or gets a little bit of rice and starts steaming up some rice and starts eating it in a bowl and says, this is what this, or messes it up even, puts the wrong spice in this bowl of rice and then ruins it, the rice. So I'm trying to give a simile or metaphor for how wasteful we have become. We don't know how to read evidence anymore. We don't know how, where's the evidence? Where's the, evidence-basedness? I just added a hyphen and where is it when you look at Michelangelo's Moses? If you ever get a chance to go to a beautiful, small, unpretentious church in Rome, where I've been several times, and see the statue of Moses carved by Michelangelo Buonarroti during the Renaissance. Where is the evidence of that? Prove to me. It's like people have become worshippers of words, minus the aliveness, minus the reality. Because people have become lazy. That's what it is. That's why that person is not looking around being mesmerized by the amount of spices in the kitchen, by the possibilities. Creativity is being killed, slaughtered every day. Why? Because our humanity is being slaughtered every day. Why? Because we are refusing to push the envelope to this existence of ours. Because we are being pushed into a tiny, narrow little strip of a way of thinking, a way of living, what to think. And they do this they perfected this from Nazi era, and then, other fascist governments have followed suit. They've used the information that they gathered from other fascist and imperialist ways of thinking, and they perfected it. You had also in the 20th century, early part of 20th century, and half of it even, with this person, the father of propaganda, Edward Bernays, who basically ruined and has been ruining and will continue to ruin generations of humans, because they've legitimized lies. They've legitimized, in fact, made it a very intrinsic part of living a human life. They've attached lies and deceptions to living a wholesome life. In fact, to live a life, you need to have these things. You need to pursue greed. You need to lie at all costs. That's why governments run on that. More and more governments around the world are doing it. What is this whole globalist agenda? They're trying to do that with religion as well, and that's why I don't follow most of these movements that are, guiding, in a sense, even Buddhist leaders. They've been huddling together, monks, and especially Theravada monks. They've been meeting together with heads of other religions, coming up with this globalist agenda. Basically is not something to do with just countries, economies, erasing borders, squeezing illegal immigration or refugees in this and that culture without proper or due process of teaching these individuals who are coming into this new country, which basically is like a virgin country. It's like, as far as value systems go, cultural, societal value systems go, it's hot and cold. And the way I see it, it's like introducing a pack of wolves into a herd of sheep. Sheep, because this culture has no idea what that culture is capable of, how they think about these matters, about these cultural norms that we have in this safe and secure society. No, we have to be open. We have to be accepting. All that liberal way of thinking is ruining society. Of course, individuals have to be, especially in those countries that fascistic or postmodernist capitalist ways of brutally destroying a society across the ocean from you has done to those people living there. So it's basic karma. They need especially if you're going to make wars happen in those countries as you sell weapons to them. People will want to get out of that country and push themselves into a foreign country. Yes, these things will happen, but and people have to have open doors in that sense to give those individuals a better opportunity for a better future. Yes, absolutely. The humanity has to be there, but it comes with responsibility, meaning those who are coming in, instead of being invaders, they need to be educated. They need to establish a clear understanding within themselves that there's been a cultural transformation happening within them to acclimate to this new culture that we're going into. Because I'm no longer in so-called my old country and my values. Instead of bringing those values into this new country, what if the values clash? And that's exactly what we're seeing. The person wants to maintain the way they functioned, they thought, the way they behaved, not just with themselves, but how they want to see the other person. They're expecting this other, let's say, woman, this person to be, well, even the statues. I was talking about Moses, statue of Moses. Or, what if it goes against this person and his culture, what the statue represents? So what are you going to do? Cover it up, destroy it? Is that what they're doing? That's what's going to happen when these individuals are not being re-educated to really learn how to respect, how to truly appreciate this new culture that they have chosen to come to and be part of. Because for sure they won't allow these individuals, let's say some European country, to go into their country where they left, and for this European person to behave as he or she would in their own home country, now in Africa or somewhere in the Middle East or somewhere in Asia. Of course they won't accept it. You have to wear this when you go outside. You have to have a man next to you. You have to cover up your hair. You have to do this, this. And the European, guess what? They will abide by those rules. Why? Because that's the rule of the land. That means the person is now culturally accepting, because they made the choice to go and be there or visit that country. So that is not the unified way of appreciating. So there's a lot of double standards. That's why the journalist is absolutely lying through his teeth. There's no moral value there. There's no virtue there when they see something horrific happen in front of them. Because had there not been a video of it, then somebody reporting on it, that journalist or that politician would say, well, where's the evidence? Now, with this technology, everybody having, cameras on their phones, they're taking pictures of it, video of it, and they're posting it live. So you have that evidence now. So what are you going to do with it? Again, we come back to morality, virtue, and that is what these philosophical systems did. These postmodernists, Foucault and others, they did. Basically, it's open to interpretation. Basically, they also came at the same time. That whole group of thugs, I would call them, academic thugs, and also in the commercial arena, like I mentioned, Edward Bernays, they were attacking on so many fronts. So one would make sure that the future generations of thinkers would not be able to think on their own. They would be told what they're thinking. Just like that person, now you're being invaded in your own home with what to go and buy. Commercials. And that's how Edward Bernays was able to convince women that it's not just okay to smoke cigarettes, but it's your right to smoke, to wear this type of clothing, to wear this short of a skirt. No, you have to. It's your right. It's this. So the whole that feminism thing. There was nothing wrong with women being women, but they made women. I've seen women come to me with tears in their eyes. Friends, not even as patients, telling me that they were now being harassed by other women because they choose to want to not go and have a 9-to-5 job outside. Instead, they want to be a parent, meaning they want to take care of their child. Instead of trusting some nanny somewhere or go, they weren't lazy, by the way. And it wasn't like they were unambitious. They were full of life. They are full of life. Hardworking. Such a mother, for me, is going to be much more productive, much more hardworking. Such a level of mother, okay? Who's dedicated, who's concerned with the education of her child or children. Not just book knowledge, There's so much that the child needs from her mother. So much that no book is going to give her. I guarantee it. No book. And that's called intuition. That's called love. That's called being a human. Kindness, compassion, empathy, which, by the way, you cannot quantify. No evidence-based model will be a reflection of true empathy in action. Okay? And that is exactly what they're trying to kill. And they are doing sad to say, they're doing this successfully. They have been. That's why you have this generation of people who are easily swayed and not seeing. Because truth doesn't have double standards. Truth is truth. If something is wrong, it's wrong. It's not open for interpretation. Okay? Well, it's just like this. It's not relative in that sense. But that's what they've turned it into. Sadly. But human beings were the ones who built such incredible, beautiful buildings like the one I mentioned in Budapest. And by the way, that was only one out of so many in that particular city. Human beings were the ones who built, who constructed these amazing structures around the world. Human being was the one who carved Moses and David and Pietà. And human beings were the ones who wrote the lyrics and put the melody into a song like Fragile that Sting sings. Human beings were the ones who were taking pictures of the water crystals that were being affected in such an amazing, beautiful, universally truthful, incredible ways when exposed to that song I just mentioned, Fragile. Human beings were the ones who were capturing photographs of this effect on the water crystal becoming more and more beautiful. The examples are numerous. And the evidence of it is also numerous. This is not a talk or something that I want to say about evidence being not important. On the contrary. Simply because something says that it is this doesn't mean anything. It needs to be the embodiment of it. So what we have are just shallow things, fake things. Fake. The terms might be lofty, and that's how exactly the World Economic Forum functions. You look at their websites or the things that they put out now. It's all open. This is not something that somebody's assuming or presuming. This is just there. Fancy words, a green planet, this and that, sustainability, reduction of population. Okay, who's going to be, what does that mean, first of all? Reduction of population. What are you going to do? You're going to hit a button and people disappear? Or you're going to hit a button and you're going to kill people? And who are these people that you're okay with dispensing with? As if you're dispensing with some trash. Or you have extra something and you're getting rid of them. That's what they have turned human beings into. When you have their in-house so-called philosopher, Yuval, character of World Economic Forum, getting out and saying, well, a human being is a hackable machine. Hackable machine, this is coming from a human being, okay? He's not just putting down, he's actually justifying what he says next, which is most human beings don't even have to exist. Imagine a human being saying that. You heard this. I remember growing up in school, I used to read things from people like Stalin, Hitler, the Belgian king who used to go and mangle and amputate people in Africa, enslaving them, killing them. You would hear it from such deplorable specimens of the human species in the past, but you don't expect to have such a person now being alive and not behind bars, or at least not in a straitjacket. No, he's fine. He's in fact, he has a tremendous following. I'm shocked. I'm ashamed that human beings have stooped so low that we are looking at this, and people go to these conventions where there's absolute 100% immorality, lack of virtue, and they justify that because, remember, we are nothing more than hackable machines. Well, guess who said something similar to that 80, 90, 100 years ago? Edward Bernays, the father of propaganda. And he didn't die, you know. You have it in Netflix because it's his bloodline going through there. It's the same thing. People tell me what they watch on Netflix. I was like, what is wrong with you? So you see, these people have these lofty titles, but there's no, when you look at it clearly, and you always look not at the words, basically we come back to that, you know, golden rule, I think. I can call it that. Trust the behavior, meaning trust the actions of a person, not their words. Not their words. For years I used to tell this to my students and then to my patients when I was a therapist. For years. Trust the behavior. Yeah, but, you know, she said she won't do it again. Yeah, but did she? Yeah. Is she? Yeah. So how valuable is her words then? This person who's a narcissist, who's abusing you, who's taking you for a ride. So the same thing, they're talking about sustainability, green, you know, reduction of carbon, this, that, nonsense. Meanwhile, each of them is flying to Davos on their private jet. Okay? Meanwhile, you have to pay extra fees now, individually, if you want to fly for work even for a short trip. And they're putting more and more restrictions, just like they've been doing that especially for the last 3.5 years. But they had started long before, since 2001. So don't trust what it's being said. Trust what they are doing. I couldn't believe my eyes, my ears, when this person that I used to admire as a science teacher, Jane Goodall, you know, famous scientist / anthropologist, especially chimpanzee expert, whom I used to take students to go see her in conventions and things, colleagues, because we used to admire. And then she sits there on the panel next to Sadhguru talking about reduction of population and the world being in this mess because there's too many of us. So it would be much better if we had much less people. Okay. Who are you volunteering to be on the front line? How about your grandkids? Your great-granddaughters? How about that? How about your friends? Are you on the front line of sacrificing? And how are you going to sacrifice yourself? No, it's always others. Others who have to be giving up. Meanwhile, they're flying there, or they're being flown there on private jets. Hundreds and hundreds of private jets, which, by the way, consume more than you could ever consume, even if you've flown for such a long, all your life on a plane. So this is all about control. This is all about lies and deceptions. These people are really a shameful stain on the pages of human history, because they've perfected all the horrific things that had been going on during the First and Second World Wars by the fascist governments, by these inhumane treatment of human beings, and just deplorable. And now, though, they are out in the open, and people have become so numb not to see what's happening. The evidence is there. They're putting it in front of you. How are you going to interpret it? So please don't be fooled by terms like, well, it says so here. What is your position towards it? Not the majority's position on it. This is where you must come back to having values, you yourself. It starts from you. The transformation has to happen within you. You must grow the spine of virtue in you by saying no to unwholesome behaviors and yes to wholesome ones, even if it's something that you've never done. You must choose something healthy, something that will not just make you happy and only for a short while, but will make you and everybody else around you happy, contented for now and especially for later, where there's no negative repercussions, where you're not tapping into the resources around you, especially by stealing things from others, in order for you to be happy. Now, that is absolute greed. That is selfish. And there's only one way to go after that. The same place where these individuals that I mentioned are going. And it's not a pleasant place. And yes, these places do exist. I'm talking about the miserable realms. Hell realms. But before they actually physically end up there, Lord Buddha calls it deposited there, right after death. Okay? Before that happens, already you are miserable. I don't care who you are. You have to numb your senses. That's why many of these people are on some type of a drug. You must drug yourself in order for you to not see what you're doing. I'll say this and then I'll stop because I'm getting tired. When I was a teenager in Lebanon growing up, bombs would be falling all around the city. Well, when I say city, I mean cities. The country of Lebanon is very small compared to other places, of course. Very small. And every night would be traumatic. Every day would be traumatic. Because instead of rain, you have bombs falling, if you can just ponder that. And if you're going down to the street, just go and buy some bread, this and that, or work, you have to be extra careful. I laugh because it's impossible to be careful in that sense. But there would be car bombs blowing up, basically, in narrow, tightly packed streets. And the streets in Lebanon are not wide. So you have buildings upon buildings, and surrounded by other buildings, that have many apartments in them. Most of these have balconies. So they would put the car down there in a packed, there's stores, this and that, where people are congregating, sitting there, and suddenly it would blow up. And you have over 200 people dead, mangled. So we grew up seeing this, feeling the explosion. One time I remember the ground shook where I was. I was in an area at the base of a building. It was a basement. And the air conditioning was blasting. It was summertime. Nevertheless, the ground shook back and forth, and we thought it was an earthquake. And I hadn't experienced earthquakes yet. And then we turned on the news just to see what's happened. And then they told us, the news came in that there was a place called Sinnel Field that it blew up. They had packed so much into this car that blew up, and hundreds of people died. Now, they would also, as I was saying, they would shoot rockets at, this was happening, there was no front line as such, by the way. I would envy people that had gone through wars in Europe and other places where there was a front line. That means that the war is happening there. The battles are happening there, not in people's backyards. That's where it was for us, all throughout the 17-year war. So, as I'm growing up, I was a child, and then I became a teenager. I lived through it, the whole thing, 17 years. I was injured in it, and I wasn't going to make it. I survived somehow. Had to teach myself how to walk and deal with the post-traumatic stress symptoms. But I would always wonder about the people who are pulling the trigger, people who are blowing up things, people who are causing the deaths of people. Sometimes they were actually shooting at other people, and those people were not wearing uniforms. They were children. One incident was that. That's why I'm mentioning this. They had a group of peace demonstrators, peaceful demonstrators standing in front of this area, barricade. And they were just holding peaceful signs and smiling. Yet, the militants opened fire on these people. And then we found out, because it's a small country, you hear things, and you saw what was happening also. People's intestines were hanging out. Okay, there's no like NC-17 or rated R type of thing, warnings. We didn't grow up in that period. You would see these things on TV, black and white TV screens. And then it came out, we understood as to what was happening in the minds of these individuals who were pulling the trigger. Because you have to go into a state of subhuman way of thinking. You have to divorce yourself, remove, extricate from yourself, from your heart, any sensibility, any compassion, any consideration for someone else. You need to see this person not as a human at the very least. Then, and of course on top of that, you will have to squeeze in so much unnatural chemicals in order for you to do these atrocities. And guess what? We found out that they were heavily on cocaine, heavily on drugs, different types of drugs, opiates. These militants. And they weren't always militants, by the way. Later on, they would remove their clothing and join society, and so you would see them. And you would know how they lived their lives. Because some of these people were neighbors. Friends of friends of friends of friends. And that's what we have today. We are being numbed. Otherwise, people should be waking up and doing something with all these atrocities in lying, deceiving people, despite the fact that everyone could see the atrocities. How can we allow these things to continue? In fact, in America, more arms, more weapons are being supplied. And now there's a talk. Why am I speaking about this? As a Buddhist monk, why? Some people are shocked. Oh, why? They think that the Buddhist monk is supposed to be, well, quiet about everything that's going on. Well, Lord Buddha was never quiet when it came down to issues of, well, there were nothing like this happening, by the way. The world was a much more peaceful place than now. Deception wasn't so pervasive. Globally, you would find unjust leaders and bad, immoral monks here and there. And sometimes Lord Buddha would just avoid, but many times Lord Buddha would put himself smack in the middle of a battle to stop atrocities from happening. He was the first socially engaged rebel. He was a rebel. His teaching is all an act of rebellion against stupidity and ignorance. But what we have today is a culture of monks who have chosen to be quiet, sticking their heads in the sand, and the very, 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 very few monks who do speak are subject to critiques by those who are maintaining the status quo as they watch this whole thing come apart, including the public that is supporting us. People are hurting. If there's a pinch, there is an ouch. Okay? And people are hurting. We cannot pretend that this is not happening. And as bhikkhus, especially those who uphold the teachings of Lord Buddha, or any authentically pure value system that maintains integrity, that maintains truth and justice, kindness, compassion towards your fellow human being and the environment, should speak up. But especially as a Buddhist monk, I feel the need to speak up because I grew up in a world that was waging wars, and I see it still. And I passed 50 a few years ago, and I still see it, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse. So I'm not going to put a Band-Aid on a Niagara while I avoid talking about tough subjects. No, I'm going to talk about the subjects that are killing humanity, killing our humanity within us. So virtue must be reintroduced, and that cannot happen in silence. We have to speak up and call it like it is. This path is not for cowards, and definitely bhikkhus are not, at least supposed to be, cowards. We speak up and say it like it is, and not hide behind anyone's robes or behind titles. The world is in flames, not the way Lord Buddha talked about only. It is in flames, and this is not going well. People are already talking about, commenting on the World War III having already begun. I don't know if that's the case, but we have to do our very best to stop it. We have to see things for what they are, and that is a huge step already. We need to make sure the mind is not agitated. That's number one. We need to keep joyfulness within the heart intact. You need to watch what your senses are being exposed to, what you're hearing. What is it that you're giving your attention to? And especially when no one's around, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about the worst of the worst that others are doing constantly? Well, there goes your joyfulness. There goes your peace of mind. And now you're trying to find ways to resolve it. But that's going to create agitation. Your blood pressure is going to go up. You're going to get stressed out, angry, etc. So please start with yourself by keeping yourself calm but very aware. Joyful but very cognizant of what's really happening. Above all, be truthful to what's really happening. I'll stop.